What's up? So my name is Nick Snyder, and today I'm going to be talking about some aspects of peace and violence. This is really my basic requirements presentation for this peace and violence course. So first, we're going to talk about types of violence and peace. So first, understand that positive peace is lasting peace that is built on sustainable investments in economic development and institutions, as well as societal attitudes that foster peace. Negative peace is really going to be the absence of organized violence between major human groups. And then even more than that, it's just any action that's aimed at the absence of violence. This will become important later when I talk about it in the applied example down below. Direct violence is physical, observable, and the provoking agent is discernible. And structural violence is built into political, economic, and cultural structures, has the same ability to harm, but it operates at a slower pace. It's related to social inequity and justice as well. Structural violence is somehow invisible, though its effects are not. Like it's not necessarily physical, but its material effects are tangible. So Coors really had a beautiful and fascinating example about the Nazi ideologies. So first, we need to understand that the main reason that the Nazis were even violent in the first place was because violence was a pillar in their beliefs, and they believed in killing anyone who disagreed with them or tried to stop them from invading other countries. And their goal was obviously to dominate the world. So in this example, direct violence would occur whenever, head-on violence would happen. So when the Nazis would invade other countries, or they attacked Jewish-owned shops and businesses, or intentionally killed prisoners in concentration camps. Just basic when they had head-on violence with other people. Structural violence would occur through the systems of social hierarchy and continuous maltreatment of the Jewish people. Moments of negative peace would occur when fighting would cease amongst the Nazis and the Allies, and also in the rare times when the Germans would make no action toward the Jews. It also would occur in moments where the Jewish people would take measures to protect themselves from the Nazis, like hiding Anne Frank. And this becomes important because negative peace is more than just like the absence of violence, and it occurs in many moments that are actions aimed at the absence of violence. So, for example, ceasing fighting and the Germans making no action toward the Jews is the absence of violence. Whereas like hiding Anne Frank is their goal. They don't want violence to happen. So that's negative peace because it's peaceful, but they're not trying to better themselves. Don't have a goal to better themselves in that, and they want to try their hardest to avoid violence and confrontation. Positive peace occurred whenever the people fell in love, would feed their families, build bonds with neighbors, and try to build a better society and for themselves in this situation. So that's really interesting. Then methods of resistance. So nonviolent resistance is going to be the practice of achieving goals such as social change through symbolic protest, civil disobedience, economic or political non-cooperation, and other methods while being nonviolent. Violent resistance is going to be like the use of violence to achieve social change and fight back against oppression. And everyday resistance is going to be practices of individuals and collectives in a subordinated position to mitigate or deny claims made by elites and the effects of domination while advancing their own agenda. Understand the difference between everyday resistance and traditional resistance, which is what nonviolent and violent resistance both are. Is that in everyday resistance, the goal is not to be noticed because all they're trying to do is take actions of resistance so that they can survive. Whereas in nonviolent and violent resistance are both ways to achieve social change. As mentioned in the both things say blah blah blah, such as social change, use of violence to achieve social change. Whereas everyday resistance, you're just trying to survive by doing it, and you're trying to go unnoticed. Whereas nonviolent and violent resistance, you want a lot of people involved so you can't get noticed. And Scott, oops, my bad. Scott really illustrates these concepts great with his example about slavery in the American South. Nonviolent resistance would exist when free black people like Frederick Douglass and abolitionists would write books and draw a lot of attention to the evils of slavery. Obviously, playing to people's emotions and trying to get them invested in the issue to help end slavery. Violent resistance would happen during slave uprisings and when people on the Underground Railroad would fight slave catchers because they're resisting and they're fighting and they're trying to end slavery. And then everyday resistance would happen when slaves would steal food to survive and help apply first aid to injuries that would occur due to whipping or overworking in the fields. Just doing basic things to resist and mitigate the maltreatment from the slaveholders, and all of the all of the violence and stuff that was happening from the slave owners. Then talking about the causes and responses to violence, we're going to talk about coups here, and her main point, and the main point that violent rebellions are an effective tool for deprived ethnic groups to overcome deprivation and attain political rights. This relates to Kissel and Kim's points about how humans are so evolved that we have developed complex reasons for violence beyond that of just fighting for food, land, or other resources. Ethnic groups engage in fighting because they are so oppressed that they fight back violently in order to gain more political rights. The reasoning for violence stretches far beyond the scope of what any other animal would do. The point is that as humans, the ethnic group's reasons for violence are far more complex than other animals, and this proves just how evolved psychologically humans have become. And then we're just going to end this with the causes and strategies of peace. So we're talking about how Scott's points about everyday resistance, how his goal is to make gradual change without being noticed, and this fits with Kemp's article about how in order to maintain peace in a peaceful society, it's an agreement and it's not just something that exists. So because both sides have to agree to be peaceful and have a joint effort to improve lives for themselves and the people. So really fascinating to think about the squatters because that Scott talks about, because they're a form of everyday resistance because they go onto land unnoticed and take it over for themselves in order to attain resources and screw over the landholding companies who monopolize and prevent people from owning land. The thing that's really fascinating to me and does need to be pulled apart is the structural violence that exists and makes squatting necessary, because it's like the landowner's greediness and even society's greediness, and the fact that the effects of redlining really still exists to this day, really kind of leaves minority groups with little options other than squatting in many situations to prevent themselves from being homeless, or if they didn't squat, they would have a drastically worse quality of life and live in a terrible area. In order to fix this problem, obviously cities need to include more low-income subsidized housing to give people more options. But my problem with how cities implement low-income subsidized housing is that they put it in areas where there just are not people that really need it, or kind of far away from those areas. And the reasoning of that is because it's, whether it's cheaper or whatever, it's a big fail because people are never going to go to it, and it's going to appear to conservative politicians that you already implemented and tried it and it's not working, so they're just going to want to cut the program completely because it didn't work. Whereas the solution would be to put it closer to the places where the homeless people are so they can use it. Because keep in mind that a lot of people that are squatters, they're so poor they probably don't even have cars, so they can't get very far on foot. Also, people really need access to tax cuts, and I really reject the idea of trickle down economics, which is just the belief that like if you cut taxes to the rich a bunch, the effects will trickle down. I really don't think that that works, and I think that taxes do need to be cut, or tax relief needs to happen for a lot of low income people because it's hard for them to afford a lot of things. And if they did receive tax cuts and also were able to have stronger access to food stamps, um, then they could take the money that would have been used for taxes and all that, and they could use it to pay for rent bills and also utilities. Oh, and that's also another reason why people squat too, because not only are they not paying for rent, they're not paying for utilities, and utility costs, especially in California and in other states, are skyrocketing or super expensive. Also, I also think, and this is just my opinion, if people were given accesses to classes about how to invest just a tiny sum of money, also if they're taught to start Roth IRAs, then they could have money in the future, because both of these ways, you can put just a tiny bit, even $20 a month, even $10 a month. You could, if you store it in a Roth IRA or if you invest it, it'll eventually go up. And then you'll have more money by the time that you don't have a job, so you don't get completely screwed and have no house or be forced to squat. Um, But also, I think a problem that I didn't really mention here is that a lot of the people that are squatters, they don't have good education because their families couldn't afford it and their families don't have good education. So they don't have people around them to educate them about other opportunities. So they just do what is more convenient for them. So if there were just ways to show people about these resources, and if you put them in more convenient areas, they probably would be utilized more. And I'm not saying you could end squatting, but you could lower the amount of squatters, and it would give the people what they need, and it would make the companies happier, and probably they'd even be willing to donate. The companies would probably be willing to donate to efforts to make more low income housing, or have places for low income people to utilize, so that squatting would happen. And that's just my opinion. So these are going to be my footnotes. And yeah, that's really my presentation. A really fascinating topics to talk about, and I do really look forward to the requirements coming in the future for the expert and the proposal for SCU. That should be really exciting. Bye bye now.